Est-ce qu'on peut demander au technicien de revenir dans la salle? Il est reparti sans nous parler. Can we have the technician back? He was here and he left. I think we cannot lose time, so I will start the launch the event. But you just log in WebEx and share. Okay. Je dis maintenant on a perdu 10 minutes. Okay, so we are now launching the event. Sorry for the few minutes we lost. Excellencies, dear colleagues, good morning to who is with us at Palais des Nations, and we're welcome to who has joined us online or is now watching the video of this event. We have the pleasure to welcome you today for a side event to the 52nd session of the Human Rights Council, where we will be discussing the protection of environmental defenders. I will have the pleasure to co-moderate this event organized by the Geneva Roadmap 4011 with Yves Lador, the representative of Earth Justice to the United Nations in Geneva. 4 years ago, the Human Rights Council adopted the Resolution 4011 on the protection of environmental human rights defenders. In view of the current increase of threats and attacks on people engaged in the protection of the environment, this resolution requires a strong implementation follow-up. This is why in 2020, 1 year after the adoption of the resolution, environmental defenders initiated the Geneva Roadmap 4011 with the aim of fully utilizing the opportunity offered by the Human Rights Council session to promote exchanges between states, researchers, and human rights and environmental defenders organizations. We will now proceed with the first part of this event, where we will hear voices from the field, from various regions and challenges faced. Some have pre-recorded their interventions and others have joined us online. But as we are celebrating this week Nowruz, let me remind here the fight of our former colleague and friend, Niloufar Bayani, about whom you can find the previous event hosted last month on our website. In January 2018, Niloufar and 8 other environmental conservationists working for the Persian Wildlife Heritage Foundation were imprisoned in Iran for their environmental activities and subsequently sentenced to lengthy prison terms. We stand with Niloufar, her colleagues, and want to pay tribute to all those who are threatened while addressing the triple planetary crisis of biodiversity loss, climate change, and pollution that this planet is facing. The first voice you will hear is a pre-recorded message that comes from Africa, and Tawanga is introducing herself in the video. I will, looking at my left, I think that now we are ready with techniques, and we will now launch the video.
Hello, everyone. My name is Taunga Chiana, and I'm the coordinator for the African Environmental Defenders Initiative at Natural Justice. The initiative was established in 2019, and it really works to strengthen the rights of environmental defenders across Africa and advocate for their legal protection. So over the last couple of years, we have seen a rise in attacks on environmental defenders in Africa. This data is still largely sporadic and nominal when compared to data coming out of South America or Asia, for example. We all understand Africa to be the next frontier for extractivism. And when we talk about extractivism here, we're really referring to oil and gas extraction, fossil fuel expansion, mining. And really the expectation is that the current numbers we have are not an accurate reflection of the situation of environmental and land defenders in Africa. In the sense that Africa is growing, and it is projected that Nigeria will be the third most populous country by 2050, behind India and China. And this really underpins the discussion around the struggle for resources. Environmental and land defenders are understandably concerned about the impact of these projects on communities. And we have heard from host communities reporting cases of poor health, destruction of biodiversity, environmental degradation, even social unrest. And we have seen this in countries such as the Democratic Republic of Congo, the Niger Delta, Angola, and many more African countries. And really, even though 35 out of 54 countries in Africa, close to about 70%, have ratified and recognized the right to a clean and healthy environment, very little strides have been made towards implementation and enforcement. And this could be attributed to an array of factors, which include lack of political will, limited access to information on environmental rights, limited access to justice, corporate capture, corruption among government and political actors, and many more challenges. However, on a much more positive note, there have been a few recent landmark resolutions and conventions made over the last few years that could potentially motivate Africa as a continent. That is the hope, anyway. Motivate Africa as a continent to adopt regional and national legal frameworks. The primary one is the African Charter on Human and People's Rights. And we know this to be the first regional human rights treaty in Africa to recognize the right to a clean and healthy environment. And that has been complemented by the revised African Convention on the Conservation of Nature and Natural Resources, which provides for access to information, public participation, and legal recourse for environmental action. At international and global level, we look at the Escazú Agreement, which essentially Africa can draw lessons and insights from to inform our own regional environmental rights agreement. And quite recently, COP15 presented an opportunity for civil society to provide recommendations to address issues faced by environmental human rights defenders. And this led to the recognition of environmental human rights defenders under Target 22 of the Montreal Biodiversity Framework. We look at the AHES Convention, which provides for the first special rapporteur on environmental defenders. Again, something that Africa can draw lessons and insights from. So what are the next possible steps? How do we strike a balance between the right to development and the right to a clean and healthy environment? We have talked about the environment. We've talked about the right to a clean and healthy environment. How do we strike a balance? Where is the starting point? There are conventions that provide for this balance. And here we look at the Rio Declaration on Environment and Development. We look at the 2030 Agenda on Sustainable Development. And we also look at the framework principles for human rights and the environment. And each one of these conventions really affirms that the right to a clean and healthy environment is necessary for the full enjoyment of human rights, and really includes the protection of the environment as a condition for development. That development cannot happen without first ensuring that the right to a clean and healthy environment is upheld. So moving on from that then, within the context of the Geneva Roadmap, what is the next step for Africa? There's been a discussion around an environmental rights agreement for Africa. And there is currently a movement of more than 40 African and global civil society members led by Allied that are really trying to build momentum for the ratification of a legally binding agreement on environmental rights in Africa. And we have seen from the Escazú Agreement that binding agreements can help states fully realize the right to a clean and healthy environment by facilitating and creating accountability mechanisms and strengthening legal protection and redress channels for environmental defenders. So as a starting point, we do, as civil society, need to mobilize support for an environmental rights treaty at regional level. And how do we mobilize the support? Where do we begin? And really, this lies in a strengthened civic space that advocates for and pushes for the adoption of an environmental rights agreement, and also identifying and mapping governments and national proponents of the environmental rights agreement, identifying champions and leaders and leveraging their support to engage other governments. And lastly, ensuring that UN special procedures advocate governments in Africa to adopt an environmental rights agreement. And really, the Geneva Roadmap has laid the groundwork and the foundation to really drive a discussion around the adoption of an environmental rights agreement in Africa. Thank you so much for your time. I will stop there for now. Have a good day. Thank you.
Thank you, Tawanga. The second voice is from Clemente Bautista of the Philippines, representing the Kalikasan People's Network for the Environment and Asia Pacific Network of Environmental Defenders.
Warm solidarity greetings. Thank you for inviting me. It is my honor to be part of this forum protecting environmental defenders. Congratulations to the organizers in pursuing this initiative in increasing the security and protection of our fellow environmental defenders. The Philippines and India were identified as the third and 10th most dangerous country in the world among environmental defenders, respectively. In the Philippines, Kalikasan People's Network for the Environment monitored from 2017 to 2022 that there were at least 196 environmental defenders killed and another 20,000 more were victimized by different forms of human rights violation under the Duterte administration. We are also seeing a new scheme of using modern warfare such as aerial bombing and strikes against communities. In 2022, we monitored a total of 14 aerial bombings which displaced tens of thousands of indigenous peoples and peasants. This on top of other violations such as harassments, that trump-up charges, illegal arrests, and detention that happened after President Marcos won the presidential election in May 2022. Barely 3 months after the election, a total of 8 cases of violations which victimized 120 environmental and land defenders were recorded. As we look up with our Asian neighbors, the situation is almost the same. Myanmar is still under military rule. Thailand was under military rule in 2014 up to 2019. In West Papua, there is a massive militarization and conflict. These are the common observation in the regions that we have in Asia Pacific Network of Environmental Defenders, or APNED. First, environmental defenders in Asia are often subjected to violence, threats, and intimidation from governments, corporations, and powerful actors. Red tagging is used, which demonize environmental defenders as terrorists. Government often use repressive laws to silence environmental defenders and prevent them from organizing and speaking out against environmental degradation. These laws can be used to arrest and imprison the defenders, shut down protests and demonstration, and restrict freedom of speech and assembly. Third, environmental defenders in Asia is often face obstacle when seeking justice. The justice system in the region is slow, corrupt, and biased towards powerful actors or government and corporations. Fourth, proliferation of resource extraction and land grabbing projects and policies. Many environmental defenders work to protect their land and natural resources from privatization and exploitation by corporations and governments. Fifth, militarization. In the guise of counterinsurgency or anti-terrorism are being used to push destructive projects like big mining, commercial logging, mega dams, agro-plantation, and the likes. In the process, environmental defenders who are in the forefront in protecting this natural landscape and communities and conserving these natural resources are targeted and victimized. On the other hand, there are recent landmarks. In the Philippines, as the people continued their struggle in the midst of insecurity and violation, we were able to have small victories or contributed to the following. First, we monitored a big drop of cases of killings among environmental defenders in 2019, 19 cases. In 2021, 19 cases, and in 2022, down to 10 cases. But this remained too many, and unacceptable. Second, we were able to push the United Nations to make a report in the human rights situation in the Philippines. This obliged the Philippine government to engage the international community in discussing the human rights situation. Third, after their foot dragging, the Philippine government started to allow last year the official visit of UN special rapporteurs into the country. Fourth, in the legislative arena, Recently, the Human Rights Defenders Protection Bill and the People's New Green Deal was approved at the committee level at the House of Representatives. These bills contain security provisions for the protection of our human rights environmental defenders. Fifth, last year, there was a judicial ruling by the Philippine Regional Trial Court that declared that the organization Communist Party of the Philippines and the New People's Army, which are involved in the local conflict or civil war, were not terrorists but are rebels who have ideas and aspiring for an alternative society. Why this is important? This decision is legally important to activists and environmental defenders who are being red tagged by the Philippine government as rebel or being labeled as terrorists. The UN can do more and other international institutions to help us environmental defenders in the Philippines and in the region. The UN should detail and put more provision on its resolution 40-11 that will oblige states to recognize the contribution of the defenders to the enjoyment of human rights, environmental protection, and sustainable environment. Second, the UN, particularly the Human Rights Council and the special mandate holders, could do a series of regional reports on the state of human rights, particularly in Latin America, Africa, and Asia. The UN should further strengthen its monitoring and enforcement of international humanitarian law, particularly in countries where there is ongoing local conflicts related to natural resource extraction and environmental plunder, like in the Philippines, Myanmar, India, Colombia, Peru, and the likes. And lastly, we hope we could work together, pushing a regional binding agreement in Asia that will strongly protect the rights of the defenders, communities, and nation to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment. Thank you and happy anniversary to all on the 25th year of the UN Declaration on Human Rights. Defend our rights, defend our defenders. Long live.
Thank you, Enteg. The next voice from the field is joining us online. Vadim Ni is the chair of the Board of Trustees of the Socio-Ecological Fund, representing here Central Asia. Vadim, yes, you have the floor.
Thank you. Good morning. Thank you, Chair, Excellencies, colleagues, for the opportunity to share the information on reprisals against environmental defenders in my region. In 2017 and 2019, my organization, together with Crude Accountability, published 2 reports on reprisals against environmental defenders in the former Soviet Union countries and the United States. Today, I'm going to present the most recent cases, including the one that occurred to my colleagues in Atyrau recently. Atyrau is the oil capital of Kazakhstan. On 13th February, 2 local colleagues received a claim from a private company for Facebook publication on conducted public hearings. One publication consists of 11 photos from the public hearings and short introductory remark at what's the subject matter of the event. The second one was included a number of remarks challenging environmental integrity of the company, with just one negative statement that the company was recently disgraced. By their claim, the company has warned that they can initiate against the environmental defenders a criminal prosecution for disseminating alleged deliberately false information. The relevant provision of the criminal code provides a number of alternative sanctions for such offenses, including restriction or deprivation of liberty for up to 3 years. Thus, it's a very intimidating case from the companies for very innocent claims and activities. During the last months, I participated in the election campaign as a candidate to the lower chamber of the parliament. And in that capacity, I had a live stream discussion of that case and tried to explain to the company what was wrong with their private prosecution of environmental defenders, including what might be the consequences under Article 3, Paragraph 8 of the Aarhus Convention. Hopefully, it will stop the company from further steps to penalize the environmental defenders. Our organization, Social Ecological Fund, is providing legal assistance to the environmental defenders. Finger crossed that everything will be fine with our colleagues. Another direction of the current activities of our organization is on environmental defenders in Russia. It's not a part of Central Asia, but we experienced some consequences of their reprisals in the Russia. Last year, Arshak Matichan, a climate activist from Russia, was deprived the Russian citizenship for an alleged minor mistake made by his parents many years ago when they obtained the Russian citizenship. Many Russian colleagues are determined or under imminent threat to be determined as foreign agents. We don't understand anymore the reasons behind the determination as foreign agents. The most recent case, you may know about it, is with the WWF Russia. We are trying to do our best by disseminating this information and by assisting to a number of colleagues to move to and settle in Kazakhstan. That is the brief update from me. Thank you very much, and my best wishes with this side event.
Thank you very much, Vadim. We wanted now to move to Europe. I'm not sure that Summer Kern, who is an NGO observer to the Bureau of the Aarhus Convention, Summer works for justice and the environment. Are you online? We see another name online, but it might be you connecting with somebody else. So it's not Summer, so I suggest we move to the last voice, which comes from Latin America and the Caribbean. Vanessa is introducing herself in the pre-recorded message that we are now launching.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for this invitation. My name is Vanessa Torres. I am an environmental lawyer, an activist, and I work in the environmental NGO Ambiente y Sociedad in Colombia. We work to protect the environment with a human rights perspective. Our work is focused on the Pacific and Amazon regions, mainly in the foothills of Caquetá and Putumayo departments and the Savannah of Bogotá. According to the Global Witness Report, at least 1,733 protectors of land and the environment have been killed around the world in the last decade. More than 2/3 of the murders took place in Latin America. 2,000 land and environmental defenders were killed in 2021. Defenders are being targeted by the government, companies, and other non-state actors with violence, intimidation, and criminalization in Latin America. Colombia topped the ranking in 2020 and Mexico in 2021. Between 2012 and 2021, Latin American countries accounted for 7 of the 10 deadliest countries for environmental activism. Brazil registered the highest number of homicides, and Colombia came in second place. Colombia continues to have one of the highest murder rates in the world. At least 30 earth and environmental defenders were killed in 2022. Also, we are in the 6th year of implementation of the peace agreement. Unfortunately, social and environmental conflicts are increased. The principal reasons: land tenure, the advance of the extractive frontier, and forces displacement. The implementation of sustainable economies at the local level is a high-risk activity in Colombia. 2022 was important for Colombia and the region. Progressivism is the predominant political vision. Gustavo Petro's victory as president of Colombia marks the beginning of an environmental and human rights agenda in which the protection of environmental defenders becomes a priority. Different organizations in Colombia have promoted the ratification of Escazú Agreement since 2018. As Ambiente y Sociedad, we participated in the negotiation process of the Escazú Agreement as public from 2014 to 2018. During 2018 to 2022, we promoted the ratification of the Escazú Agreement in Congress. This process ended in October of 2022. We are currently waiting for the review of the content of the agreement by the Constitutional Court. So the country will prepare for the implementation phase of the Escazú Agreement. The ratification and implementation of the agreement is the key to an effective regulatory framework that prevents conflict situations and for the recognition of the role of the environmental defender as a fundamental piece in the process of conservation and restoration of strategic ecosystems. The implementation of the Escazú Agreement is an opportunity for the parties. The creation of a protection route at the regional level in the annual Defenders Forum is a joint construction scenario, an example for the plan. Next month, in April, we will celebrate the second COP. For us, it is an opportunity to strengthen the role of the public in the agreement. We cannot forget that we, the citizens, are the heart of the Escazú Agreement. Finally, the definition of the environmental defender established in the Resolution 4011 is essential for the protection of indigenous people, Afro-descendant, and farmers community in our country and in the region. Recognition of the differential impact of climate change is the key to protecting strategic ecosystems. Thank you.
Thank you, Vanessa. We will now proceed with the program with Yves Lador.
Thank you very much, Diana. We're trying to check whether there's a technical obstacle that prevents our colleague from Europe to join us. So we're trying to fix that, and we hope she'll be able to join us a bit later. As we heard, we are in the 25 years of the Declaration on Human Rights Defenders, and in this process, we have seen how important the special procedures are. Last week, we heard the report of Mary Lawler, the Special Rapporteur on Human Rights Defenders. She was hoping also to be with us today, but unfortunately had to apologize. The situation was a bit too tight. And so we'll start immediately with a presentation from another special procedure who's very involved also in this, the Special Rapporteur on Human Rights and the Environment, Professor David Boyd.
Hello, I'm Dr. David Boyd, the United Nations Special Rapporteur on Human Rights and the Environment. As you all know, we are in the midst of a planetary environmental crisis. The world urgently needs more people to stand up and fight for the protection and restoration of the air, water, soil, biodiversity, and climate that we all depend on. Ultimately, all human rights depend on a healthy planet. So we need more defenders of the right to a healthy environment, indigenous rights, the rights of the child, and other human rights. And yet in far too many states, standing up for the environment, for clean air and water, healthy biodiversity, healthy oceans, and a safe climate is a dangerous activity. We all know the statistics. More than 200 documented murders of environmental human rights defenders every year. And that's just the tip of the iceberg of intimidation, violence, criminalization, and harassment. Women and girls are amazing environmental human rights defenders, but are vulnerable to gender-based violence. This situation cannot continue. Environmental human rights defenders need protection, and they need it now. We have the UN Declaration on Human Rights Defenders. We have the Human Rights Council Resolution 40/11 on environmental human rights defenders. We have the Escazú Agreement with its pioneering obligations to protect human rights defenders. We have the new Special Rapporteur for environmental human rights defenders established by parties to the Aarhus Convention. A growing number of states have national protection mechanisms in place to safeguard defenders. But none of these words are sufficient. They are tools, and tools need people to be useful. People with the knowledge, courage, and capacity to use them. We need the immediate implementation of existing protection mechanisms and the enforcement of existing laws. We need to use human rights-based approaches to conservation, climate action, and preventing pollution. We need governments to pass and implement laws recognizing the title and rights of indigenous peoples, as well as legally guaranteeing their right to free, prior, and informed consent before activities are approved in their territories of life. We need to build capacity, reduce corruption, and strengthen the rule of law. When I speak to environmental human rights defenders, they often tell me it's difficult for them to get access to help. They need help to build networks, to create connections with lawyers, scientists, funders, and other allies. There is strength in numbers. They need help to harness the power of new digital tools. They need resources. We also need to prevent the socio-environmental conflicts that are the root cause of the persecution of environmental human rights defenders. That means transforming our economies, replacing fossil fuels with renewables, replacing industrial agriculture with agroecology, and ending the exploitative mentality of extractivism. We need a new legally binding treaty to govern the conduct of multinational corporations because the UN guiding principles on business and human rights are too weak. Finally, we need to put human rights at the heart of all climate and environmental actions. Far too often, conservation actions have violated human rights, evicting people from their homes and communities, criminalizing traditional lifestyles, and in extreme cases, murdering Indigenous peoples and members of local communities for simply trying to exercise and defend their rights. Surely we can all agree that in the 21st century, this is completely unacceptable. We need to protect the heroic individuals and communities working so hard to safeguard this beautiful blue-green planet that we are all so lucky to call home. I'd like to extend my personal gratitude to all environmental human rights defenders for the vital work that you're doing on behalf of your families, your communities, and the beautiful planet Earth. Thank you all, and take care.
Thank you very much to David Boyd. As he mentioned, and it was also mentioned by other speakers before, one of the important progress that has been made since the adoption of Resolution 4011 is at the regional level within the UNECE framework, where the parties to the Aarhus Convention created a rapid response mechanism under the form of a special rapporteur on environmental defenders. And so now we have the pleasure to hear Michel Faust, who was previously here in the Council Special Rapporteur on Human Rights Defenders, who is now occupying this position. Michel.
Thank you for inviting me to participate in this big event. Indeed, the Geneva Roadmap is for me a very important initiative to follow up on the implementation of Resolution 4011 on the protection of environmental defenders. And that's why I very much welcome this panel discussion to look at what has been done since March 2020 to better protect those who put their lives at risk to preserve the future of our planet. One important decision has been the decision made in October 21 by the 46 states parties to the Aarhus Convention, including the EU itself, to create a rapid response mechanism for the protection of environmental defenders. And in June 2022, I have been elected by consensus to become the first UN Special Rapporteur on environmental defenders. And this is the first protection mechanism to be established under a legally binding instrument, which is the Aarhus Convention. Of course, the mandate is linked to the geographical area of the Aarhus Convention that covers Europe, Central Asia, Eastern and Southeastern Europe, and Caucasus, and as I said, the EU itself. But it will also protect defenders beyond the region, because it has also an extra territorial scope. What does it mean? We all know too well that companies are sometimes far more dangerous for defenders than states. And when companies, international companies, which have their seats, their headquarters in one of the countries party to the Aarhus Convention, would persecute, would threaten, would harass defenders in countries where they operate through contractors, through subsidiaries, then defenders from those countries would fall within my mandate. Let me give you concrete examples. If a French company would do harm to defenders in Uganda, or a company based in Madrid would threaten defenders in Colombia or in Peru, or a company based in UK would persecute defenders in Indonesia, then environmental defenders from those countries could seek protection from my mandate, and I would speak to the CEOs of those companies. As special rapporteurs, I will, of course, use the same working methods and the same tools as the other UN rapporteurs, like letters of allegations, urgent appeals, quiet diplomacy, grant to visit, attending trials, and an observer, or provide amicus curiae to courts. Of course, these tools are more designed to respond to attacks that have already occurred, but another important component of protection under the mandate is prevention. And in this context, the role of my mandate is also to support the establishment of the strengthening of safe and enabling environments for defenders, including climate activists. And as we are discussing the Geneva Roadmap, we all have a role to play in contributing to a safe and enabling environment for environmental defenders. We should promote cooperation. We should build much more stronger bridges between the two families, the human rights family and the environment family. Indeed, too many environmental defenders, climate activists, are not at all familiar with the international human rights system, and many don't know that there are protection mechanisms that would apply to them. Many of them don't even know that they are defenders. So that's why we need to join efforts. We need to create coalitions. We need to share information and experiences on the international, regional, and national protection mechanisms. We also need to fight against impunity and bring perpetrators to justice, including the intellectual authors. We also need to share positive narratives on environmental defenders, including climate activists, on the legitimacy and the importance of their work, including by high-level state officials. All this contributes to creating a safe and enabling environment, and it is an entire component of. Thanks again to the organizers for revitalizing the Geneva Roadmap and organizing this panel discussion. I wish you all very fruitful discussions, and you can count on me as a partner and as a supporter for your future activities. Thank you very much.
Our thanks to Michel Faust, and indeed we will count on him. That's for sure. As he said, working on protecting environmental defenders means bringing together two fields, the field of environment and the field of human rights. But right from the start, the Geneva Roadmap was not only this type of alliance, but it was also, right from the start, a joint initiative coming from the research sector and the civil society organizations. So we're very happy now to give the floor to Dr. Peter Larsen from the Geneva University, who is one of the founders of the Geneva Roadmap. Peter.
Good morning, everyone, and hello here from Geneva. My name is Peter Larsen. I'm with the Environmental Governance and Territorial Development Institute at the University of Geneva. Apologies, first of all, for not being there in person. Due to changes in calendars and activities, it was impossible for me to be present at the Palais this morning, something I regret dearly, given the importance of personal interaction. However, grateful to have this opportunity and engage further in the conversation about how we can actually strengthen efforts to protect environmental defenders. I want to take a couple of minutes to briefly talk about lessons we have from the Geneva Roadmap initiative, and also a few points about what we can actually do from the research community side. So back a few years ago, many of us got together, civil society actors, environmental defenders, people from the conservation and the human rights community, to talk about how we could actually work together and what kind of goals would make sense to really strengthen the protection of environmental defenders. There were 4 goals that came out very clearly. One was to reverse the tide and the attacks, the tide of marginalization and attacks. The second was to reinforce environmental rights, enable civic spaces and accountability. The third was about bridging initiatives, enhancing cooperation. And the fourth, really about breaking the isolation and ensuring effective access to protection of environmental defenders. Now, have we been able to make any progress on these 4 major goals? In some respects, clearly attacks continue, and in fact, many continue to be poorly documented. So in many respects, we have not really been able to reverse the tide. The issue remains important. The challenge is there. If we look at reinforcing environmental rights and enabling civic spaces, certainly at both international and at the regional level, there have been a number of new mechanisms and policy initiatives, as we've also seen earlier in this event today. Yet there's a far way to go. And indeed, in many country contexts, the spaces are shrinking and the situation is deteriorating. And this again highlights the extreme importance really of continuing this cooperation, which is not a one-time thing, but an area in need of long-term cooperation. In fact, if we look at actually how to secure access to protection initiatives, we also see that there's a long way to go when we talk to environmental defenders across the world. Many, first of all, are still below the radar. They're not being identified, or indeed need to shy away from the public in order not to face challenges, both personally and organizationally. So let's just say that the action goals today remain relevant, but progress has only been partial and much work needs to be done. Now, what can we do from the research community side? Let me come up with just 3 examples of things that we have been doing in our small corner of the world. Together with Professor Jörg Balziger at the Institute, we have an international cooperation activity with colleagues from the International Institute for Law and Society in Peru, with Ateneo University in the Philippines, Moi University in Kenya, basically cooperative research on mining, the mining sector, a particularly dangerous and complicated sector for environmental defenders, trying to understand the dynamics there, supported by the Swiss National Science Foundation and its SPIRIT program. Another line of activity that we from the research community engage in concerns policy advocacy. We engage with policymakers, share insights and knowledge on a range of policy fields on environmental defender issues, whether it's the environmental policy field, security, human rights, or other policy agendas where the topic is relevant. For example, we have engaged a lot with the IUCN, its different policy arenas, such as its Congress, but also worked on documentation, trying to understand better the kinds of issues and challenges that are being faced by its membership, for example, resulting in the report called Conservation NGOs at Risk. Finally, of course, we engage in a lot of teaching and capacity building, whether it's through our own teaching programs, or whether it's actually cooperation, for example, last summer with the Global Diversity Foundation, its Summer Academy for Environmental Changemakers, where I had the privilege to teach with 2 environmental defenders together in a joint effort to document the issues and also explore ways of actually strengthening responses. So there's lots we can do from our respective positions. But finally, let me look forward, which I think is important why we're here as well today. We see all the new mechanisms. We see the issue being recognized. We see the policy opportunities, yet we might conclude that not enough is actually being done, and it's often done too late. What do we mean by that? Well, we often start recognizing the issue far too late compared to earlier stages where actually there are opportunities to find alternative routes. Now, we need to really now take a hard look at what's working and what's not working in protecting defenders effectively. That's not done overnight. It varies a lot from countries, between regions. And I would just insist again here that this Geneva Roadmap space is really a very important space to have regularly for exchange and lessons learned. And it's actually also a very good example where international Geneva can and does work. So in this respect, I just want to congratulate you all to really attend this event, make it work, and let's see how we can continue this process of exchanging and strengthening ways forward for the protection of environmental defenders. Thank you very much for your time.
Well, here also a warm thanks to Peter for his message. And as he said, we are in need of more work and more research on how to protect better the environmental defenders. And at the very beginning of her presentation, Tawanga mentioned the coalition Allied. And I'm very happy now to turn to Eva. Eva, you're joining us from Rome. Hope you're hearing us very well. And your organization, the International Land Coalition, is working right now on methodologies in the collection of data concerning environmental defenders. Would you please share with us your work and your perspective? Eva, the floor is yours. Eva, we can't hear you.
Thank you. No, I was muted. I hope that you
Okay.
hear me now and tell me
Yes,
if
now
you
we
can.
hear you. Yes.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you, and good morning, good evening to those who are joining from further east. It's really a pleasure to be here on behalf of the International Land Coalition. As Yves said, my name is Eva Hirshaw. I'm the Data and Land Monitoring Lead. I'm also currently serving as the co-chair of Allied, the Alliance for Land, Indigenous and Environmental Defenders. Today I'm going to speak quickly, as Yves said, about the work we're doing around data to make land, environmental and indigenous human rights defenders more visible, and to use this data in different channels for accountability and protection of these defenders. We at ILC we work with defenders on a number of different ways. So ILC is a member-based coalition. We have more than 300 members working across 84 countries, and collectively we estimate that our members represent upwards of 70 million land users. As Michael Boyd said, a number of these land users would not consider themselves defenders. They're not activists. They live on the land, they depend on the land, and they derive their livelihoods from the land. ILC works with national and regional member-led platforms in order to jointly address the issues that are facing these land, environmental, and indigenous human rights defenders. We also have a protection fund that we can leverage in order to respond to cases of imminent danger. But from the data working group of the Allied Coalition, we brought together about 20 organizations that were working with different ways to document attacks on these defenders. Some of them didn't consider themselves data collectors. They were organizations who had been in the field, kind of gathering information on these cases and organizing them. And with these members of the data working group, we started asking ourselves what we could do together with this data, this information that we had. We know that all of these numbers are gross underestimations. What could we see if we put these numbers together? Could we get closer to an approximation of reality? And the first thing that we wanted to understand is what the official data was telling us. We knew, as many of the speakers have mentioned today, that there are indicators, there are frameworks for accountability. The SDGs, indicator 16.10.1, provides one of those mechanisms for accountability, but we still are seeing limited data being reported officially, limited data being channeled upward through the UN. So of the 1,940 deaths that we know took place between 2015 and 2019, reported by the UN, we don't see those disaggregated at country level, and we cannot see land, indigenous, and environmental defenders, despite estimations that they represent more than half of the cases. So we can't see the group where we know that most of these attacks are taking place, and that impairs our ability to build protection mechanisms and policies that can respond to this violence. So what did we know we could do together? Across 5 pilot countries, about 20 organizations came together. We identified 8 data sets that span from the global to the regional level, down to the local, community-based data collection. And we built a template and a methodology by which we could integrate these data sets. This meant coming up with joint definitions, joint categories, and translating each of the individual data sets into a common template. What did we find? We found that even where lethal attacks were getting the most visibility, were having the most attention, we see this hidden iceberg that we wanted to uncover. So again, we know that this is an underestimation of the non-lethal attacks that are taking place, but we, for the first time, were able to visualize it next to this more visible, more publicized number of killings. Also, working with local data collectors allowed us to see attacks, non-lethal attacks, that are very hard to verify. You can see from the bar graph in the infographic that most of the threats that we documented, or most of the attacks that we documented, were threats. Threats are not going to be published by media outlets. They are harder to verify the further you get from the victim themselves. So by working closely with those citizen-led data collection efforts, we were able to see these attacks that we know often serve as precedents, often indicate an impending lethal attack. So looking forward, we are working with custodians of data sets in order to make land and environmental defenders more visible. We're working with OHCHR to integrate a definition of these land, environmental, and indigenous defenders into the metadata. We're encouraged by the recent decision at the UN Statistical Commission to engage citizen-led data around SDGs. And we are hopeful that this kind of data integration, working with community-led, citizen-generated documentation of attacks, data can be an effective tool and one part of a roadmap, if you will, towards better protection of these defenders. Again, very happy to be here and look forward to following and contributing to your work on this. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Eva, for your contribution, and I think it shows really in a very interesting way how we can try to proceed and try to, as Peter said, reverse the tide. Unfortunately, we're still far away from that, but we see some progress being made in order to tackle better this emerging issue. Unfortunately, our colleague Summer Khan will not be able to join us. We haven't been able to solve this technical issue. Probably they will have to receive from her a video that will be it will be able to see that on the Geneva Environmental Network webpage. I'm afraid also that as we had to start a bit late, we won't have much time for questions as we had hoped. Now I'd like to turn to the perspective, because the objective is, and I think that the last contribution is a very good element on that, how can we proceed and how can we improve in the implementation of Resolution 4011? Now, one of the ideas that has came up over the last weeks and months is perhaps also to strengthen the work which is done by UNEP on environmental defenders. We heard at the very opening that they have been themselves directly affected by some repression. And so there is some work. The executive director of UNEP did very clear messages about environmental defenders. So I'm very happy now to turn to Sue Young, who is joining us from Nairobi. We had the pleasure to have you with us here in this room, actually, Sue Young, 2 weeks ago. But we were talking about general issues. We were not talking specifically about environmental defenders. So we'd like to hear from you. Would a plan of action or a focal point on Defender in UNEP be something useful?
Hi. Thanks, James, and thanks so much for having me here. And I know we have limited time, so I'll be very quick. So plan of action. So I think as we've seen, like this issue of environmental human rights defenders has been a global concern for many, many years, and it has not really improved. And there's a data gap, and there's implementation gap, and there's also like the lack of support to the environmental defenders. So I think any kind of plan that we can actually push forward together with the defenders and with states and also the private sectors and all the other UN agencies, that will be really, really useful, because we need a coordinated efforts on this issue. So so definitely a plan will be useful, and I think a focal point like such as I think the AUS Convention is a great example of having appointed a special rapporteur on environmental defenders. So this we see some progress on this, but and the usefulness of a focal point and the designated expert on this issue, or the designated program on this issue is really helping to push the agenda forward and the protection and promotion of environmental defenders. And just wanted to mention also, UNEP is working on this issue. This is one of the priority areas for the UNEP. And we are also working internally on this, but also with other UN agencies, and to make sure that actually the policy level of the issue of environmental defenders goes down to the ground level. So we are developing, it's almost finalized, developing a guidance for the UNCTs and UN country teams and UN agencies on the protection of environmental defenders. So just to let you know that we're also making an effort at the policy level, but also at the country level and the practical level to support the work of the environmental defenders.
Thank you so much, Sue Young. And we look forward to working with you in UNEP in the direction you have just pointed. Phil, thank you very much for been with us. But actually, the International Service was with us right from the beginning at the very first meeting. We saw some of the progress, but there's still so much to do. What is your takeaway as a concluding remark to this session?
Well, thank you very much, Eve, and also Diana. So I think three things are critical. One is narratives and recognising that the work of environmental human rights defenders is absolutely integral to the realisation of the right to environment, and it therefore follows that threats, attacks and restrictions against environmental defenders, whether they're physical, psychological, legislative or otherwise, should be understood as attacks on the environment itself. And those who are responsible for such threats and restrictions, whether that's unscrupulous corporations, myopic policymakers, or armed security forces, should be regarded as environmental violators and vandals. As a number of speakers have said, I think that legal recognition and protection is a really critical element contributing to the protection of an enabling environment for environmental defenders. At the international level here in Geneva, that really requires that states and other stakeholders ensure that resolutions and instruments on the right to environment explicitly recognise the integral role of environmental human rights defenders, as well as explicitly recognise that threats and restrictions against them undermine and violate that right. It also, as Michelle said, requires that states support the development of a comprehensive binding international treaty on business and human rights, with particular provisions on the importance of consulting with, respecting and protecting environmental defenders. The final point that I make relates to the issue of solidarity and the importance of coordination and solidarity between environmental and human rights organisations at both the international and the national levels. Civil society mobilisation and coordination around COP27 in Egypt was really important to put human rights at the heart of the environmental justice agenda, as well as to highlight civil society repression in the country and the ways in which that harms the environment. And we really need to build on this and ensure that COP28 in the UAE is similarly used to spotlight the repression of human rights defenders, both environmental human rights defenders and all other human rights defenders. Looking further ahead and recognising the really integral relationship between an enabling environment for civil society and a healthy environment for all, we must be really resolute, I think, in demanding that major international environmental conferences never be held in repressive states with closed civic space.
Thank you very much, and this concludes our event. We need to give back the room very sharp. So I'd like to thank everybody for attending this meeting online, but also in the room. It was a very hybrid meeting, but we wanted to have the voices directly from the field and also to see what are the perspectives in strengthening the implementation of Resolution 4011, a very important resolution of the Human Rights Council. Thank you very much and have a good day. And once again, a great thanks to the team from the Geneva Environmental Network, without whom this event would really not have been possible. Thank you very much.
Thank you.